Good. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Shady Rose. I'm the events manager here at Lost City Books. I'm going to tell you a little bit about us and then a little bit about our author speaking this evening before we get launched into an awesome evening of discussion. But first things first, please silence your cell phones out of respect to our author. Those things can be really noisy and disruptive, and we don't like them. Secondly, if you ordered a copy of your book through our website, just check in with me first if you haven't received it yet so that I can make sure that's taken care of through our back channels here. Nextly, if you have any questions or comments that you would like to offer during this discussion, please hold them until the end. We'll make some time for that at that time. On the subject of questions and comments, this event, as you might be able to see, is being live streamed on both YouTube and Instagram. And while none of you are visible, if you choose to offer a comment or a question, that will be a part of the live stream. So maybe don't curse anyone directly on our channel, if you will. A little bit about Lost City Books. If this is your first time here, we are a used, new, and rare bookstore. So if you get a chance to take a look at all of our shelves, you notice that we pack them very tightly and densely with titles that we carefully curate because we care about the books that are on our shelves. So we want to bring in books that are representative of the deeply varied community that we have here at the store, as well as our clientele and the people who come in. So Red Clay Suzie was such a great fit to come here and be a part of our store. So thank you again for joining us. And if you want to keep up with us, you can check us out on lostcitybookstore.com or follow us on any of the social medias for funny quips and book-related jokes and posts. A little bit about Jeffrey. Jeffrey Dale Lofton hails from Warm Springs, Georgia, best known as the home of the Roosevelt's Little White House. He calls the nation's capital home now and has for over 3 decades. During those early years, he spent many a night trotting the boards of DC's theaters and performing arts centers, including the Kennedy Center, Signature Theater, Woolly Mammoth, and Studio Theater. Cool. He even scored a few television screen appearances, including Residuals Rich Super Bowl halftime commercial, which is Accountant Wisecracked is the finest work of your career. Well, that's yet to be seen, I hope. Ultimately, he stepped away from acting for other more traditional work, including providing communications counsel to landscape architects and helping war veterans tell their stories to add richness and nuance to historical accounts. At the same time, he focused on pursuing postgraduate work, ultimately being awarded master's degrees in both public administration and library and information science. Today, he's a senior advisor at the Library of Congress, surrounded by books and people who love books. In short, Paradise Ivy. Red Clay Suzie is his first work of fiction, written through his personal lens growing up as an outsider, figuring out life and love in a conservative family and community in the Deep South. Please welcome Jeffrey Dale Lofton. So I want to start by asking you a few kind of broad questions about Red Clay Suzie. It's an incredible story that we got to talk about a little bit when we met virtually before. But one of the things that stands out is that it's a semi-autobiographical work of fiction, and that it's infused with your experiences in your life. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why you chose to tell your story, but through fiction, and how you attached your own life to this work while also creating a new world in the realm of fiction?
I do think of Red Clay Suzie, to use literary terms, as a fictionalized memoir, because Philbert, the protagonist, like him, I was born gay with a skeletal deformity of the chest in Warm Springs, Georgia. And like Philbert's family, mine was just not quite equipped to guide and shape the path of a child like me. I mean, that's not to say that there was neglect. It was not willful neglect by any stretch, but I would say it was parenting through equal parts of love and ignorance and fear. it was just difficult, under the best of circumstances, during the best of times, because I knew from such an early age that I was just so different on the inside and the outside. Excuse me. And, I was always on the fringes, looking in and trying to make sense of a world that didn't seem to square with what I felt deep down inside of me. And I decided that I wanted to fictionalize it rather than tell a true memoir, because there were things in the book that I really wanted to explore and say, but I thought it would be better served through fiction rather than a memoir. Well, and this will give you an example of, I don't want to reveal too much, but this will give you an example of why I think of it as, this is an example of inspired by true events. So Philbit's dad, as mine, was shot in the head while trying to break up a domestic dispute at the filling station, the convenience store that sat across the road of our home, from our home. It was sort of I think of it as the Times Square of our really small community, very small community. And while I changed the details of that horrific event, I changed it for the book. It's an example of why I think of Ray Clay Suzie is based in fact, but not bound by fact.
Thank you. So, drawing from that wellspring of your personal experience, can you tell us a little bit about why the engine of fiction was useful to you to tell this story? And, for example, why not just write an autobiography? Why, what drove you to expand upon your real lived experiences and dive deeper into this character, Philbit, whose name I love, by the way? It's a really great name.
Well, I wanted to explore relationships and experiences that I didn't experience in my life. There's a character I love. His name is James, and he is Philbit's one true friend all the way from first grade all the way through high school. And he is Black, and he lives in a world that it's just a matter of fact that he lives in a world with racism, conscious and unconscious racism. And he and Philbit, and of course this is the relationship in the book, he and Philbit are viewed as outsiders in this world. That's their kindred spirits, and that's one of their connections, one of their strong connections. But James sees the world in a really different way, and he helps Philbit. He opens the door for Philbit to see the world in a more inclusive way, a way which I did not in my life, really, when I was young. And I don't want to say too much there because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I did not have a friend like James growing up. There was a boy that I thought could be my friend. I wanted to be my friend, but I didn't approach him and ask him, and I was too afraid. I was afraid of rejection. I rarely did I ever approach anyone to be a friend in my young life. I waited for people to come to me if they ever did. And so writing this story was my way, and it's fictionalized. It's my way of righting a wrong, creating the relationship that might have been, could have been, if I had been bolder, more confident, and acted on it. So I think that's an example, another example.
Yeah, thank you. Well, speaking of, the outsiders, which is, I feel, who this story is for, it can be said that many marginalized people can relate to the story in Red Clay Suzie, just being outcast, being, whether it's mistreated by their community or ignored or underserved by their community, right? So what do you hope, or do you hope that when someone of a marginalized identity, whether they're gay, whether they're a Black person, transgender, et cetera, experiencing all of these things, what do you think that they'll draw from this story
first knowing that it's a work of fiction that expands on a real experience. So someone will read this and say, this is already moving, but to know that this is close to someone's real lived experience makes it even more, drives it closer to home. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to. I intended for Red Clay Suzie, though drawn from my personal experiences, I intended it for it to be a universally relatable. If that's a term, because I think that people from all walks of life, no matter what adversity they face, might see themselves in Philbert. I hope that they do. That was what I hope. So I see this as I see Red Clay Suzie as a it's hard fought self-acceptance over like a childhood of bullying and body shaming and body blow rejection, and that's my intention. But I didn't really see it that way at first, and I wrote it initially as an outpouring of years of humiliation and pain and embarrassment built up inside of me and needed to come out. And so that's the way I started to write it. It wasn't until I was sort of halfway through that I thought that this maybe could be a story that could help other people who are living on the fringes, my fellow fringes as I think of them, young people who are having a rough time today, as I had a rough time when I was young. I think that it's really best said by someone else. So Pete Cross was a very talented voice actor who narrated the audio version of Red Clay Suzie. And he and I talked after he recorded it, and he said, it's so tender and beautiful. But the important part of this is he said, I wish I'd had this book when I was a kid. It would have made all the difference. And that, I think, sums up what I hoped it could be for people. There's nothing, I couldn't have any higher praise than that.
That's beautiful. I'm going to have to give the audiobook a listen as well. With that, I feel, more connected to the story, and I know that you prepared a selection to read, so if you'd like to proceed with that.
Thank you. I'll set it up for everyone, but I won't give it away. So this is, so as I mentioned a moment ago, Philbert's born with a physical deformity of the chest, and this makes his shirt off in public and unthinkable. Philbert's longing for overcomes his fear of virginity. Carefully hidden by his singer sewing machine. This is really important. Knox's nickname for Philbert is Keebler. Okay. Let's go swimming, Knox said. I avoided swimming because it's a shirts off activity. So I said, I don't swim. Well, I'll teach you, he said. Oh, that's okay. Everyone needs to know how to swim. I know how, I just don't. Why not? He asked. Water gets in my ears. Well, earplugs. They don't really work, I countered. Oh, come on. Keebler, it's so hot. Okay, you don't have to go in, but you're coming along. Let's go. And with that, he pulled me out the door by my hand, and then he guided me towards the woods, his hand on the small of my back. I followed him down a steep, but not deep gully, and into a mostly dried up creek bed. And then we turned and we were in the open, the sun suddenly making us squint after having been in the cool shade of the piney woods. And a beautiful dark green lake spread out with the woods on all sides. He sat down on the bank and he started to pull his shoes off. Let's go in. No, I said way too abruptly. You don't have to put your head under the water. No. Well, okay, he said. Before I lost my courage, I admitted, I don't want to take my shirt off. thinking the only thing worse than him thinking out, learning about deformity was to leave him thinking I was a total weirdo. Oh, well, I never done that. It's because it's okay. It's okay, Keebler. Then before I could talk myself out of it, I took my shirt off, my chest fully exposed in the sunlight, and I just stood. See? He didn't talk, he just stared. My teenage fantasy was looking at what I spent hour after hour trying to hide. Say something, I thought. Does it hurt? Only when you don't touch it. Oh, I said without thinking. What? Nothing, just forget it. I never felt more exposed than I was right then. Shirt off, with my white, pasty, skinny, malformed bird chest in full view of the boy I loved. I didn't even know if he liked boys, much less freaky me. And the sun hurt so much, but I couldn't hide. In the cavity of my chest, already a smaller space than my heart needed to function, felt more compressed and restricted than usual. But I cherished this moment as much as I hated it. And it hurt so much, both the blood pumping heart in my chest and the feeling heart, the one I wanted to give to him. Was I going to die right here in front of him? But if I didn't take this chance now, I never would. And if he didn't reject me after seeing my half-sunken chest, then I could trust him. I could believe anything that happened after that. And he stared at me. But I couldn't look back. As embarrassing as it was, the pain was not because I was disfigured and all my organs. I ached because someone finally saw me.
That was so beautifully read in your voice. So thank you.
Thank you.
I can see how much of your life is in the words. I certainly moved. Thank you so much. So as you were writing this book, I'm told that you wrote it in an unusual way. What is the unusual aspect of your process for telling the story?
Well, I started writing Red Clay Suzie, as it turns out, just after I left home for college, LaGrange College, which is a small liberal arts institute in LaGrange, Georgia. And at that point, a teenager, the most interesting thing about LaGrange and LaGrange College was that they were not where I grew up. And so, and you might, why do I say as it turns out? Well, I didn't know I was writing a novel or a collection of short stories or essays or anything. It was my furious scribbling in journals was, I've come to think of it as exorcism by exposition. That I was humiliated. I was confused. I was angry. I was fearful. And years of that needed to come out. So I was gay, had this physical deformity. I was effeminate. I was slight of build, and I was, from a very early age, 4 or 5, youngin, as we were called in the South, I was a target of bullying and derision. And living at home had this effect of pushing all that down so that I never dealt with it. The very complex fabric of my boyhood. But when I went to college, it was like everything exploded. The dam just crumbled in this flood of vivid memories of my family, my friends, childhood and teenage friends came flooding towards me. All of these people who had such a formative role in my life to that point. And so so I wrote to expunge, and it was so comforting. It was a salve almost. I think a steroid cream on an open wound, but school got in the way. School got in the way, and I didn't seem to have time or the emotional space to write. And so I put my journals away, thinking I'd go back to them when I got my college sea legs under me. And I didn't write for over 30 years. I didn't write that for over 30 years. I've always written, but I didn't write this for over 30 years. And then I moved fast forward to Washington, D.C., just several years ago. And I read Call Me By Your Name, and I reread To Kill a Mockingbird. And something about those two books together, it's really the power of literature for me. It just broke me open, cracked me open. And I went back to the journals and I reread them. There's a lot of material there, and I started writing again, typing away on my mobile phone on the metro, going to and from my work at the Library of Congress. That's how I wrote this thing. And I didn't tell anybody until I had a full first draft, beginning to end. And then over breakfast one morning, I said to my partner that I wrote a novel. And he almost spat out his coffee in disbelief. And that's an image I'll always remember and treasure.
I wonder how many DC-based authors wrote their manuscripts on the on the metro.
Well, we're not talking to each other very much, so I think quite a few of them might be at it.
So let's talk a little bit more about the character of Philbert. Can you tell me about, obviously we talked a little bit about the parts of you that are in Philbert. Can you also talk a little bit about some of the aspirational parts? Like this character's form in the story.
Well, as I mentioned, I didn't start writing this for anyone but myself. I never intended for anyone to read it initially. But at some point, I came to think of it as maybe a roadmap for people who are having a rough time of it now, as I did when I was younger. And at that point, about halfway through the first draft, I thought maybe this could be a novel. Maybe this could be something more than just my musings, my recreating my life, writing about the really difficult parts of it, and also sort of creating what might have been if I had been bolder, if I had made different choices. And so it was already starting to take on that fictionalized memoir feel, because there was so much of me in it, the physical me, the emotional me, the internal me. But also there were characters that sort of sprung out of nowhere that I wish I'd known, that I long to know. And I know are out there somewhere. And so I took it in sort of baby steps. I found first readers, people I trust. There's an author in the room tonight who was a first reader, Alice Powers, the author of the best-selling In Mind series. And so people like her who I trusted and gave me great feedback. And that was one step towards sharing this story with more people than myself. And then I looked for and signed with a literary agent. That's definitely a step towards sharing it with other people. And then once you sign a publishing deal, there is no turning back. You can't get out of those. And I decided that, earlier on that I was going to see how it went every step of the way, and until eventually you can't turn back. So I likened this process of publishing a book, sort of like coming out. I came out to my parents over 30 years ago, and I did it in tears, and I did it with shame, because I was ashamed. And this process of writing this book and sharing it with the world is a different kind of coming out. I feel like I'm coming out as a full, wholly realized person. It's been so freeing. And that's what I hope it can maybe help other people find their own freedom, their own courage. And I'm coming out and I'm not in the same kind of tears. I'm not in tears, and I'm not ashamed. And that's why I fictionalized it, and that's my journey to get here tonight.
Thank you. True. I want to get a bit of a left turn and talk about the stage for a second.
Okay.
So, as mentioned in your bio, you spent a lot of time treading the boards, as they say. And what you're talking about so far is a lot about, opening yourself up, exposing the truth of your being, to the world in a way, like you said, coming out. Do you relate any of your experiences with being on stage to that same aim? Do you see yourself on stage also doing that? And how does that inform how has that informed your writing for this novel?
I think that they're very much related. I've always, I think in my heart, been a storyteller. I love storytelling. And so, and I come from a very creative family. My mother's a beautiful seamstress. I think that under different circumstances, she might have even been a designer. My father paints. My brother is like my grandfather, who's no longer with us, but my brother's very creative. He can build anything. He can solve any sort of technical problem. And he's a musician. He has a couple of guitars. And so I think my passion is storytelling. And I but I think the first time it really was evident was when I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be on the stage. And I love that way of telling stories because it's and that's where I think I learned about the narrative arc and how to maybe tell a story in a different way. And though I was using other people's words, playwrights, Gwydion Sullivan is the playwright who's here tonight. So I was able to use the words of other people to tell stories. And I'm doing it now with my own words. But I transitioned from being an actor, which I loved and enjoyed and have wonderful friendships and wonderful memories from that, to working with communications firms, helping tell the stories of products and people and causes. And then I found myself at the Library of Congress, initially helping war veterans tell their stories through oral histories. And not always written on the side, I never told anybody, but I was doing that too. And I think this is just the evolution of that process. So I see all of it as leading to this point. And I'm just, I think if I had to, if anyone couldn't tell a story, I would be it'd be a very sad way of living. And I think all of us have this urge to tell our stories.
They say that the actor's job is to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances, right? And in a way, I can definitely see how you've written truthfully of yourself under the quasi-imaginary circumstances of Red Clay Suzie. That was a bit of a stretch. Thank you for bearing with me, everyone.
We're with you. We got it with you.
Can we talk a little bit? Let's get a little time check here. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the setting of the book. It's in the South, which, as people on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, we all have an opinion about being in the South and being one of us. Can you talk a little bit about that setting and how, of course, growing up there, it influenced the person that you became, but also it influences the way that the story is woven and the path that it takes and the ways that the characters relate to each other. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So the early part of the book is really about building the world that Philbert is born into and grows up in. And the red clay is just everywhere in the South. Now, for this child thinks that red clay is only where he is, in Georgia. But of course, red clay is really, it defines the South and wants it touches you, it never leaves you. The mark is on you. I wouldn't call it a stain, but I would call it a mark. Because I know that no matter where I am in the world, I'm always a Southerner. I'll always be a Southern writer. But I wanted to really build a world that readers would find themselves immersed in. And so the red clay is very important and a big part of that. The others are the cars. So there are, this character loves cars, as I do, just obsessed with cars. And I think that he sees them, as I did, as almost living creatures. He feels at home with them. He feels at home in them. He feels at home running his hand, his cooler hand across the hot, fender of a car sitting under the beating Georgia sun in the summertime. And so he personifies these cars, and they have landscapes, they have smells, they have personalities. And so I used really the clay and the cars to build this world that he sort of pulls in around him, and as almost as comforting and safe for him. And I don't know, have I answered your question to a point? I mean, I can continue that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of my questions was about the cars. I'm curious about it.
About cars.
I would say I'm very knowledgeable about cars, but I just like looking at a classic car. Just like,
Yeah, I can appreciate it. But if you ever need to know anything about a car, you come right to me.
oh, thank you.
I will help you.
Great. So for a few minutes, I want to kind of talk about the technical aspect of publishing the book. Can you talk a little bit about your publisher and what your experience was like presenting this book to this particular publisher?
So Post Hill Press published the book, and they actually, when I was approached with the opportunity to publish with Post Hill Press, I thought really long and hard about it. They're known for publishing mostly nonfiction works, and many of those books are written by arch conservatives. And my parents are of that same political lean, arch conservatives. But I talked to the acquisitions editor, and she explained that she was really focused on expanding the fiction side of their catalog, the fiction side of their house, and diversifying the voices that they represented. And I was really interested in that. I like the idea of being on the vanguard to help them do that, to share different kinds of voices, and to sort of change the complexion of the catalog and the people who write the books within it. It was the process was a really great process. The book, looks great, I think, and it was a really the editing process was very organized, and I felt really good about the changes to the book once it got to the publisher. The story is, some might look at this decision as a political decision because the publisher is known for publishing nonfiction works of conservatives. I looked at this as an opportunity to, I think of this story as a human story, not a political story. And I thought, well, if someone who would, if one of a reader of a typical Post Hill Press book, who might not otherwise pick this book up if it were published someplace else, I like the idea of maybe getting this into the hands of people who might not otherwise read it. I thought that if that happens, then it's just one more queer kid whose life can be better because someone who might not have otherwise read the book read it. And I think that you make change through heading towards the fray and talking to people and with people and among people who have different points of view than you. We don't change the world. We don't change anything by talking to people who think like us or are like us. And so going with Post Hill Press was the right choice for me because I get an opportunity to share my story, which might not be a story they're familiar with or even willing to hear, simply because I published with a publisher that might not be the traditional choice for a book like this.
Thank you. I mean, I definitely see what you mean. And all of the progress that we want to see in the world comes from openness, right?
Yeah.
And just offering constantly of ourselves, even when it feels like it might be a little perilous, or uncertain.
But Post Hill Press, that was a laudable effort, I think, to go in that direction. I wanted to join them.
Patrick, thank you for doing so, because now we have this wonderful book. Okay, let's see. We have a little bit more time. I want to talk about the author's note, which includes a message about anti-bullying and anti-body shaming, just acceptance and seeing of other people, which seems to be a thread, of course, woven through the story. Can you talk a little bit about why you're passionate about that and sort of how you want to get that message out to the world with this book, but also in general?
Well, I guess the best way to really answer that question is to share the messages I hope that people who are having a rough time of it, my fellow fringies, are having. So there are several messages that I would like to share with them, and it's there in the book. And I want them to know that bullies are just paper predators who have only as much power as you give them. And once you understand that, they lose a lot of their power, and they're just as afraid of life as you are. That's why they are bullies, in my view, a big part of it. And I want them to know, with fellow fringies, to know that their bodies, their imperfect bodies, perceived or real imperfections, they're so beautiful, and I want them to treat them with kindness and love and care, so that they will take them as long as and as far as they possibly can. And I want them to know that it is the quality of their hearts and their minds that are most important. And I think above all, I want them to know that love is never wrong. True love is never wrong. And they should bravely bestow it on whomever is worthy of it. I mean, that's what I wish I had known. And that's why I'm so glad that other people will be able to read this. Because if I could, I'd go back many years and whisper that into the ear of my younger self.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful message. Now we have time for questions from our audience or comments.
Jeff, I'd like to know, since you wrote the journals in the 20s, I guess like early 20s, late teens, and then they kind of percolated for 35 years, what kind of book would you have written if you just wrote it based on the journals when you were young versus the kind of book that you wrote now after you've had this distance? That's one question. The second one is, was part of the reason for not writing this based on true event story that people in your family would have read it and been upset about it?
Wow. Okay. I think that if I had continued to write as a younger person, it would have been a play script, because I studied playwriting in college. I took my undergraduate degree was speech communications and theater. And I don't know if any other undergraduate university offered that, but I took advantage of it. And so I wanted to be a playwright. I wanted to be an actor and a playwright. And I have lots of stuff that I'll never show anyone in play form. And I think that it probably would have taken that form and not a book, if I had continued to write, during my 20s. So I think that it would have been similar in theme and maybe even in characters, but that's what it would have been. And the other part of it is the family, how the family would react. And I've, I've always written in some form, short stories or just journaling. And what I was concerned about how my family would take this, and they're just now reading it because it's just being published. But the dedication is to my beloved partner, to my cherished and perfectly imperfect family, and to fellow friends everywhere. And so my family and I have had a lot of rough years, but a lot of good years too. And we have come to appreciate each other and cherish each other. I certainly cherished and loved them. And they're reading it now in that context. And maybe I shouldn't have been so afraid in the earlier years. Maybe I should just go on for it, because I was concerned, and it was an unthinkable act years ago. But they're reading it in that context, and so they haven't finished reading it. But the comments have been some version of, "You wrote what? A novel? Is it a paperback?" So that was important early on. And they've also said, we didn't know you had such a rough time of it. We didn't know. We didn't understand. And so those comments now, I think, show that I probably could have done this earlier. And I wish I had, for myself and for them. Yes.
I just want to follow on and say one of the things I love about your novel is actually how much love you have. It's so clear how much love you have for the place you grew up. You speak about the things, the real milkshake, the green milkshake, with such tenderness and care. And I would hope that your family would read that and see nothing but love. It's just steeped in that. Anyway, that's not the question I wanted to ask. I've been, one of the things I'm most impressed by in your novel is, I keep using the word unhurried. It has a very unhurried pace. It's almost like you're getting our consent to go along on the story with you. You do spend a lot of time early on laying out the circumstances for Philbit, which lets me, okay, this is new territory for me, and now I feel situated in it. And so now when we get into the darker territory and I'm with you, I'm with Philbit, and I'm wondering how conscious that was versus you starting from this impulse of, I'm gonna mark down what the past was. I'm gonna capture what the past was, and then depart from there as the older Jeffrey to kind of create a slightly new world. So how intentional was that unhurried pace? Like, come on, I'm gonna take your hand, I'm gonna show you around Warm Springs, I'm gonna show you the filling station, and then I'm gonna tell you once I've gotten to know you a little bit, once you've gotten to know, then I'm gonna tell you some of the things that weren't so great. So how conscious was that?
So for those on the live stream, I don't know if you can hear the questions. I'll repeat it. The question really is about the pacing of the book, because the first half is very languid and slow and unhurried, and then the second half of the book is much. I've always thought of it as sort of like a slingshot, like pulling it back, and letting it go, or sort of the climb on a roller coaster. You're going to go on this ride, and we're climbing, and then it zoom goes down. It was so the pacing of the book was intentional. It's what I really wanted it to be, and I actually what I had in mind, the image I had in mind was the pace of a life, because my life in the early days, during childhood, the days seemed to last forever, and the years seemed to last forever. And I say in the book that Philbit's summer, his world, his time in this world is really marked by his brother's schedule, who is in school. Okay, his brother's in school, but then there's this long summer, and where he is because of the brother's schedule. And so I wanted to pace the book the way that a life plays out. And so while in childhood, it seems to last forever because you don't know that it ends. And then once you get older and more aware, and you experience loss, and you can see people around you getting older, getting sick, passing away, then it goes so fast. And it seems to just go at a faster clip, the more you get into life. So that was the intention. It would be like a child's world until about halfway through the book, and then it starts to pick up and just rush towards the end.
Can I sort of add to that? I agree with everything that was just said, but an additional take on it for me was the first few chapters before the book becomes so plot driven feel like stories you would tell on a front porch, drinking sweet tea in the Georgia sun and eating buttered biscuits and with honey, and that kind of pace also felt intrinsically Southern to me.
Yes, so the comment was that the book seems, the first several chapters seem like sitting on a front porch, and sort of before it gets to the more plot-driven part of the book. And that is exactly what it is. It's getting its character building. You get to know all of these characters. You get a chapter with maybe two characters and learning them, and other characters don't appear at all.
But when stuff happens to them, you actually care about them at that point. Before so. You maybe don't.
Yeah, I hope that when things start to happen, the more plot-driven things start to happen, that you care about them. But yeah, and so being a Southern storyteller, I did want to give that sort of sitting on the front porch, drinking sweet tea, or sitting in the backyard with TV trays out in the backyard with food set up on those. I wanted the book to have that feel all the way through. I think Jason had a question.
I have two questions, but they're both short.
Two questions.
First question is, you're a really funny guy. Is there humor in this story? Where is humor? Does humor have a place in this? Second question is, who is Suzie? You're talking about a film bit. I haven't read the book yet, but the book is called Red Clay Suzie. So where does Suzie?
So the first question is there humor in the book? And well, I think there's humor in the book, but that's for the readers to decide. If I had it marked, I'd read a really very brief passage just to whet your appetite. But it's some version of Mama said that Jorma sits and save on the water bill. And there are those moments all the way through to cut the more serious parts of the book. And the other question, what was the other question again? Suzie. So Red Clay Suzie. Red clay I talked about, the alluvial soil of Georgia. That's about place. And Suzie, well, I think I can't say more. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, so I have to read the book for that one.
There's some red clay right there.
Oh, that's it. There's some red clay right here. So this is red clay from Georgia. My brother, mom and daddy, my mother and father, they washed and dried properly about 5 mayonnaise jars, put red clay in there and shipped them to me so that I would have some red clay to show everybody. They kept one for themselves, although they have a yard full of it. But yeah, this is the red clay of Georgia. It looks red, looks like a red brick. That's the color of it. And I wish you could smell it. And the people here can't smell it, but it's very earthy and rich. It's a beautiful smell. And this clay, I swear, it's got a mind of its own. When it's wet, it can be so gloppy, like a soup. It can be, I think of it sort of like butter just out of the refrigerator for like 15, 20 minutes. And if you're not looking at it and touch it, you just don't know you don't know if it's dry or if it's wet. You just can't tell because it's so hot in Georgia. It could be dry, or it could be just barely wet from a rainstorm that came and went so fast that you didn't know it was there. It just has a mind of its own. It's fascinating to me. Yes.
This is a coming of age book. Are we gonna hear more about Philbit as he gets older, and as he leaves home?
So the question is, will we see more of Philbit? And yes, you will. I think of this as the first in a series of Red Clay novels. And so this is just the beginning of Philbit's story, Philbit and Knox's story, and everybody else in the world.
Any others? Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing this book with us and your time.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Shady Rose, for being my conversation partner and inviting me to be here, and Lost City Books, which is a fabulous independent bookstore in Alice Morgan. Come visit them because they got everything you need. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have some time to chat and mingle, ask any more burning questions you might have. And if Jeffrey feels so inclined, get your book signed. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and thank you for watching at home. Everyone, have a good night. You feel so welcome. Thank you. Come on up.
So impressed.